Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us source material, and our mission is to cut through the noise, pull out the most fascinating insights, and give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without all the overload.
Exactly. We're your guides, basically navigating these texts, trying to help you understand the core ideas, maybe some surprising details, and, you know, why they might actually matter to you.
And today we're diving into something pretty potent and, let's be honest, undeniably counterintuitive. We've got excerpts from Mark Manson's huge book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck.
Right, a counterintuitive approach to living a good life. And these sources, they're packed. Unconventional wisdom, some pretty challenging anecdotes, and just a very direct perspective on happiness, success, what we should really care about.
Our goal for this deep dive is to really unpack Manson's core arguments. We want to explore those sometimes shocking examples he uses and try to figure out why this whole subtle art thing resonates so deeply, even when it pushes back against, well, everything we're usually told.
Yeah, get ready to look at life's struggles and successes through a very different lens. It's definitely going to challenge some assumptions.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the core, almost rebellious premise of the book, especially for anything labeled self-help. Don't try.
Right out of the gate, Manson introduces us to a figure who embodies this paradox in a surprising way, Charles Bukowski. The book paints him as, an alcoholic, a womanizer, a gambler, kind of a lout. Hardly the image you'd expect for inspiration.
No kidding. Yet his story is one of decades of just relentless rejection as a writer. His work was seen as crude, horrible, disgusting. He lived this life, 30 years of drinking, dead-end jobs.
Right, for 30 years. Until finally, age 50, a small independent publisher gives him a shot. He hammers out his first novel, Post Office, in like 3 weeks, and then goes on to sell millions of books.
Now, the standard story here, the one our culture absolutely loves, is, see, he never gave up. He persisted. That's the American dream.
That's exactly what you'd expect, right? But the twist, the thing Manson really zooms in on, is Bukowski's tombstone. It just reads, "Don't try."
Don't try after all that struggle. Manson's take is that Bukowski's success wasn't about trying to be some great writer or trying to be someone he wasn't. It came from just accepting his identity as a, quote, loser, being comfortable with his failures, and writing honestly from that very specific place. He didn't try to be anything other than himself.
And that's where the authenticity came from.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually the success, this comfort with failure, this don't try idea, it really stands in stark contrast to today's culture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're just drowning in messages telling us we need to be constantly happier, better, richer, more popular, look perfect.
All the time. We're told to give a fuck about everything, the perfect Instagram feed, the latest phone, constantly comparing our vacations, our houses.
It's this relentless pressure, always chasing more positive experiences, more validation, be amazing 24/7.
And that pressure leads directly into what Manson calls the feedback loop from hell, and also the concept of the backwards law.
Ah, the feedback loop from hell. I think, yeah, everyone listening can probably relate to this on some level. It's that awful spiral where you get anxious about being anxious.
Angry about being angry?
Guilty about feeling guilty. You're not just feeling a negative emotion, you're feeling bad about feeling bad.
Exactly. It's the meta problem, right?
Yeah.
You layer this judgment onto the original feeling, like, I feel sad and I shouldn't feel sad, what's wrong with me? And that judgment, it just makes you feel worse.
And Manson argues this loop is practically an epidemic now. Why? Well, he points to social media, consumer culture, constantly showing us these curated highlight reels. Everyone else looks perfect, happy, successful.
Yeah, so if your feed is just engagements, promotions, amazing trips, and you're just, struggling with normal anxiety or feeling a bit lonely, it starts to feel like you're the weird one.
Like something's fundamentally broken in you because you're not constantly ecstatic.
Right, you feel bad about feeling bad.
It's like, in the past, maybe you just felt bad, dealt with it, moved on. Now you feel bad. You pick up your phone, see everyone else looking amazing, and your first thought is, wow, I must be a total failure for feeling this way.
And this is where the backwards law comes in. It's a concept Alan Watts talked about a lot. Manson frames it like this. The desire for more positive experience is itself a negative experience.
Okay, hold on.
And counterintuitively, the acceptance of a negative experience is actually a positive experience.
So the harder you chase happiness, the more you feel like you don't have it. The more you desperately want to be rich, the more you feel poor. That's messing with my head a bit.
It's the paradox of wanting, right?
Yeah.
Manson uses this analogy. trying to walk towards a house while you're on LSD. Apparently, the harder you try, the farther away it seems to get.
Okay, did not see the LSD analogy coming, but the point lands. It makes sense.
It kind of echoes Camus, who said, you know, you won't find happiness by searching for happiness. You won't find the meaning of life by searching for it. It really embodies that don't try idea. The desperate chase just highlights what you feel you lack.
So if chasing happiness makes us miserable and giving a fuck about every little thing traps us in this awful loop, what should we give a fuck about? Manson says the key isn't like total indifference, it's conscious choice.
Exactly. He says those big, life-defining moments often involve what he calls non-fuckery. Basically, not caring about the fear or the difficulty, but caring so much about the outcome or the value behind it that you push through anyway.
Like switching careers or ending a bad relationship.
Yeah, things that take guts. The problem for most of us, he argues, is we give way too many fucks about trivial things. We get totally bent out of shape by a rude comment online, or someone cutting us off in traffic, or our favorite show getting canceled.
While the really important stuff, our health, our relationships, our core values, gets pushed aside, neglected.
Right. He says we have a finite number of fucks to give in our lives. It's a limited resource. If you spend them all on tiny irritations, you end up feeling constantly wronged, entitled to always be comfortable and happy.
And every little setback feels like a major injustice. You're just stuck.
And here's where he introduces the subtleties. Subtlety number 1. Not giving a fuck does not mean being indifferent. It means being comfortable with being different.
Okay, so it's not apathy.
No, he argues indifferent people are actually scared. They care too much about appearing cool or detached, so they just hide and disengage. They give too many fucks about what others think.
So it's not about caring about nothing. It's about caring deeply but selectively, about the right things.
Precisely, which leads straight into subtlety number 2. To not give a fuck about adversity, you must first give a fuck about something more important than adversity.
He uses that really powerful example about his own experience when someone was trying to rip off his mother financially.
Yeah, he describes saying something like, I don't give a fuck. I will ruin this guy's life. That intense willingness to fight, to ignore the potential trouble or cost.
That came from giving a massive fuck about his mother and about justice in that situation.
Exactly. Now, contrast that with, say, someone screaming at a cashier over 30 cents. Manson kind of suggests that level of outrage over something so minor often happens because that person genuinely has nothing more meaningful, nothing more fuck-worthy in their life to channel that energy into.
So if you find yourself constantly sweating the small stuff,
it might be a sign you're missing the bigger, more important things to care about.
And then there's subtlety number 3, which feels maybe the most fundamental. You are always choosing what to give a fuck about.
Always. We're basically born giving way too many fucks. Think of a toddler having a meltdown because their hat is the wrong shade of blue. Maturity, he says, built on experience, is learning to be selective. It's like that line from The Wire. Bunk says, that's what you get for giving a fuck when it wasn't your turn to give a fuck. You got to pick your battles.
So the goal isn't to eliminate caring altogether. It's to choose where you invest that limited energy, that finite number of fucks.
Right. It's about clarifying what truly matters to you. And crucially, being okay with the fact that sometimes life is just going to suck. He calls it practical enlightenment.
Practical enlightenment. I like that.
It means accepting the inevitable suffering, the failures, the losses, the regrets, and, yeah, even death.
He connects this back to the Buddha story, right? The way he retells it. The prince shielded from suffering, then seeking it out through extreme measures.
Only to realize suffering isn't something to be avoided or chased. It's just inherent in life itself. For everyone. Rich, poor, pursuing pleasure, practicing abstinence, everyone suffers.
And that acceptance, just understanding that pain and loss are going to happen, that's the first step. It helps you let go of the resistance, which is often what causes the extra misery on top.
Which pushes back hard against this common idea that happiness is like an equation you can solve. If I just achieve X, then boom, I'll be happy.
Yeah, Manson argues dissatisfaction, unease, they aren't bugs in the system, they're features. They're built in.
And this is where he introduces the memorable disappointment panda, sort of an anti-hero superhero.
Right, the panda whose superpower is telling you harsh truths that make you feel bad initially, but ultimately make your life better.
Like, sorry, buddy, but losing 20 pounds isn't going to magically fix your failing marriage.
Yeah.
That kind of tough love.
We all need that sometimes.
And one of the panda's biggest truths is that suffering is actually biologically useful. We evolved to feel dissatisfied because that feeling, that discomfort, drives us to change things, to innovate, to survive.
It makes sense. Pain and misery are features, not bugs.
Think about physical pain. Stub your toe. It hurts like hell. But it teaches you, don't walk into that table again. Makes you more careful.
And psychological pain, rejection, failure. It signals something's wrong, teaches you what maybe not to do next time.
Right. And if we're constantly coddled, always shielded from discomfort, we actually lose the benefits of that healthy, necessary pain.
And problems. They never really go away, do they? They just, upgrade.
Exactly. A billionaire has money problems. A person experiencing homelessness has money problems. Totally different scale and type, but problems nonetheless. Life is just an endless series of problems. You solve one.
And another one pops up, maybe a slightly better one, hopefully.
Hopefully. So the disappointment panda's big line here is, don't hope for a life without problems. Hope for a life full of good problems.
Good problems.
Problems you actually want to have.
Because happiness isn't the absence of problems. It's found in the process of solving them. It's active. It's doing something. It's a constant work in progress. So true happiness isn't reaching some static state. It's finding the problems you genuinely enjoy having and enjoy tackling. Whether that's the simple problem of figuring out what to cook for dinner, or the complex one of building a career or navigating a relationship.
And Manson points out two common ways people totally mess this up. First is denial.
Just pretending problems don't exist, distracting yourself. Feels good short term.
Yeah, but leads to long-term insecurity, neurosis. The other is the victim mentality.
Believing you're helpless, blaming everyone else, circumstances, again, feels maybe a little better for a second.
But leaves you feeling angry, powerless, stuck in the long run.
Both denial and blame are easy outs, right? They give you those quick, cheap highs. Actually solving problems, that's hard. It often feels bad while you're doing it.
And Manson suggests, maybe controversially, that a lot of the traditional self-help world kind of peddles those highs, the denial, the blame shifting, rather than focusing on the difficult work of solving real problems.
Because negative emotions aren't the enemy. They're signals. Your brain basically saying, hey, over here, unaddressed problem.
And positive emotions. Those are the rewards for taking the necessary action.
But he also warns you can't always just trust your emotions blindly. They're signals, yeah, but not like divine commands.
Right. Denying the negative signals stops you from solving problems. But on the other hand, over-identifying with every single feeling, reacting instantly. He compares that to a toddler. Or,
his dog example, yeah. Not always the best guide.
Not always. And emotions are fleeting anyway. They don't last. If your main goal is just be happy all the time, you're stuck on what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill.
Right. You achieve something, feel good for a bit, then your baseline resets and you're chasing the next thing, the next high.
And problems are recursive, he points out.
Yeah.
You solve the problem of being single by getting married. Now you have the problem of navigating marital disagreements.
You solve the problem of renting by buying a house. Now you have the problem of fixing the leaky roof. Every gain involves some kind of loss or new challenge. The positive defines the negative.
Which leads us to what Manson argues is the real question you should ask yourself. Not the vague, fuzzy, what do you want out of life?
Yeah, because everyone says, be happy, have a good family, nice job. It's too easy, too generic.
The harder question, the more revealing one, is what pain do you want in your life? What are you willing to struggle for?
Oof. Yeah, that hits different.
Because that, he argues, is what really determines how your life actually unfolds. You say you want that corner office. Okay, but are you genuinely willing to struggle with the 80-hour weeks, the constant pressure, the political games, the mind-numbing paperwork?
Or you want an amazing, passionate relationship. Great. Are you willing to struggle through the uncomfortable conversations, the vulnerability, the risk of getting hurt, navigating jealousy or insecurity?
You want to be incredibly fit. Are you willing to struggle through the physical pain of training, the mental discipline of tracking your food constantly, saying no to things you enjoy?
Happiness isn't the absence of struggle. It actually requires struggle. It doesn't just happen. It grows from the problems you choose to tackle. Fulfillment is earned through choosing and managing your struggles.
He shares his own story, right? Fantasizing about being a rock star.
Yeah, loved the idea of it. Being on stage, the applause, the cool factor.
But he realized he hated the actual process.
Yeah.
The tedious hours of practice, hauling heavy equipment, the uncertainty of finding gigs, dealing with broken gear. He didn't actually want the struggle.
He wanted the reward without the fight, the victory without the battle, which, let's be honest, is pretty common.
Totally. And that's the key insight. Who you genuinely are is defined by the struggles you're willing to embrace. The person who consistently hits the gym isn't just strong-willed. They, on some level, embrace the struggle of physical exertion. The successful entrepreneur doesn't just want the money. They often thrive on the struggle of building something, the uncertainty, the risk.
It's not purely about willpower or grit, is it? It's more fundamental. It's about finding struggles that align with something you actually value.
Exactly. Your chosen struggles determine your successes. And those successes then tend to create new, hopefully upgraded struggles. It's a continuous upward spiral, ideally.
The joy is in the climb itself, engaging with the problems you've chosen.
Yeah. Which, speaking of uncomfortable truths, brings us to maybe one of the most direct and challenging sections. You are not special.
Right. He starts with this character, Jimmy. The embodiment of entitlement without any actual substance.
All talk, no action, lives off other people, but has this absolutely unshakable, almost delusional self-confidence.
Jimmy felt great about himself, even while his life was objectively falling apart around him. No marketable skills, blamed everyone else, the haters, the ignorant people who just didn't get his genius.
And Manson connects this type of personality, this phenomenon, to the modern self-esteem movement, or at least a misinterpretation of it, where self-worth got measured purely by how positive someone felt about themselves.
But the data, the research, actually suggests that facing adversity, experiencing failure, that's essential for developing genuinely strong, resilient adults. Just telling kids they're exceptional without grounding it in reality, well, it creates more Jimmys, not more Bill Gateses.
So true self-worth, Manson argues, isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about how honestly you can confront your negative aspects. Jimmy hid from his flaws by inventing imaginary successes.
Whereas someone with genuine high self-worth can look squarely at their negative parts. Okay, I'm really irresponsible with money, or, I do tend to exaggerate my accomplishments and then actually take steps to improve.
Right. Entitled people, because their self-image is so inflated and fragile, can't honestly acknowledge their problems. It would shatter the illusion. So they just keep chasing those feel-good highs, accumulating denial, until eventually reality delivers a knockout punch.
Manson gets personal here, too. Talks about his own adolescence, dealing with some real traumatic shit, as he puts it. Drug bust, expulsion, parents' divorce.
And how that pain led to its own form of entitlement. Feeling uniquely wounded, which then manifested as neediness in relationships, constantly seeking validation.
He argues entitlement often shows up in one of two ways. Either you expect others to be responsible for your feelings and problems. You should have known that would upset me.
Or, the flip side, you take on too much responsibility for other people's issues. It's all my fault they're unhappy, failed, etc.
And both are ways of avoiding dealing with your own actual problems and feelings.
And the realization that often breaks this pattern, though it's hard to swallow, is simply, you aren't special. Your problems, your pain, while very real to you, are likely quite common, shared human experiences.
That's actually the first step towards solving them, owning them without the drama of uniqueness.
But this idea clashes hard with what he calls the tyranny of exceptionalism, especially amplified by media and social media today. We're constantly bombarded with the extremes, the absolute best, the absolute worst.
The billionaire geniuses, the catastrophic failures, the overnight sensations.
And this constant exposure conditions us to believe that being exceptional is somehow the baseline, the norm. But most of us are, by definition, average at most things.
So we feel perpetually inadequate, not good enough.
And the insecurity can fuel compensating behaviors like entitlement, feeling we're owed something special because we feel lacking, or addictions, seeking those external highs to feel better.
It's like the media landscape accidentally created this massive insecurity machine. Technology solved a lot of old economic problems, but maybe unleashed a wave of new psychological ones. Insecurity, doubt, shame, they're almost open source now, constantly circulating.
Yeah, and the promise that everyone can be extraordinary and achieve amazing things is not only mathematically impossible, it's psychologically damaging. Accepting that you are, in fact, pretty average at many things, maybe even most things, is incredibly difficult. Our egos hate it.
But it's also profoundly freeing, isn't it? It removes that crushing pressure to constantly perform, to prove your specialness to the world.
Absolutely. And ironically, the people who do achieve exceptional things, Manson argues, usually aren't obsessed with proving they're already great. They're obsessed with improvement. They start by accepting they aren't great yet, and that realistic self-assessment fuels the hard work. It's almost anti-entitlement.
So accepting the mundane truths of life, like who maybe my individual actions won't radically change the world, or large parts of life are just kind of boring and routine, that's like eating your emotional vegetables.
Exactly. Not glamorous, but essential for health. It lists the pressure. It allows you to actually appreciate and find meaning in the simple, ordinary parts of life: connection, small acts of kindness, learning something new, enjoying a quiet moment.
These things are ordinary for a reason, because they're what actually make up a good, meaningful life for most people.
Building on that, Manson then explores the value of suffering, which sounds grim, but it's about purpose. He uses the incredible story of Hiru Onoda.
The Japanese soldier, right, who kept fighting World War II in the Philippines for, what was it, 30 years?
30 years after the war actually ended. He was following this old never surrender order, genuinely believed the war was still on.
That's wild. He was killing locals, stealing livestock, convinced any evidence the war was over was just enemy propaganda.
Until this adventurer, Norio Suzuki, actually found him in 1974. And they literally had to track down Onoda's original commanding officer, who was long retired, to fly out and formally relieve him of duty.
Wow. So Onoda's motivation, his reason for decades of suffering, was this simple, unwavering loyalty to an order.
Yeah. And Suzuki, the guy who found him, his motivation was eventuality. He was apparently also looking for the abominable snowman and a panda. The point being, both chose these seemingly arbitrary, even destructive causes. But because they chose them, their suffering had meaning within that chosen mission. It made it endurable, perhaps even purposeful for them.
And that flips the usual question, doesn't it? If suffering is inevitable, maybe the question isn't, how do I stop suffering? But why am I suffering? For what purpose?
Exactly. Because when Onoda finally returned to Japan, it was completely transformed. Consumerist, modern, unrecognizable to him. He was a celebrity, but he became deeply depressed.
Because the Japan he'd suffered and fought for, the values he held, they didn't exist anymore. His decades of suffering suddenly felt meaningless in this new context. He eventually moved to Brazil.
It starkly highlights how crucial the why behind our suffering is, which Manson then explores using this idea of the self-awareness onion, layers of understanding ourselves.
Okay, layer one.
Layer one is just recognizing basic emotions. I feel angry, I feel happy, I feel sad. Simple, but he notes many people actually struggle even here. They have emotional blind spots, can't quite name what they're feeling.
Layer two is asking why you feel that emotion. Why am I angry? Why do I feel uninspired right now? This layer starts to reveal what you consciously or maybe unconsciously consider a success or a failure in your life.
And layer three, this is the deepest at the core, your personal values. Why do you measure success and failure by that particular standard? What are the fundamental principles guiding how you judge yourself and the world?
And Manson argues this layer is the most important and also the most difficult to get to, because our values ultimately determine the kind of problems we choose to have, and the quality of our problems determines the quality of our lives.
Right, but most people, he says, are pretty bad at understanding their own core values. We tend to blame others, avoid taking responsibility, just chase those fleeting emotional highs, which are superficial. Most shallow self-help never even touches this third layer.
Because honest self-questioning about your deepest values, it's really uncomfortable, isn't it?
Profoundly. Manson even suggests that often the more uncomfortable the answer feels, the more likely it is to be true.
He gives that personal example, being really bugged that his brother wasn't texting him back frequently.
Yeah. Layer one,
Yeah.
feeling annoyed. Layer two, why? Because it felt like his brother didn't care. Why? Because if he cared, he'd make more effort to text. Layer three, what's the underlying value? Having a good, close relationship with his brother. Okay, but what was the metric he was using?
Frequency of text messages.
Exactly. He was using a pretty poor, superficial metric, text frequency, to measure a deep, complex value, the quality of his sibling relationship. And that mismatch was making him feel like a failure.
The objective truth, how often his brother texted, mattered less than his subjective interpretation, which was based on his chosen value, and in this case, a flawed metric.
Problems are going to happen.
Yeah.
But the meaning you assign them, based on your values and how you measure them, that is chosen.
This reminds me of his rock star problems example. Dave Mustaine from Megadeth kicked out of Metallica right before they became arguably the biggest band in the world.
Despite Megadeth being massively successful in its own right, Mustaine apparently spent years feeling like a failure because his internal metrics seemed to be more popular, more successful than Metallica. By that specific, perhaps unhealthy metric, he was constantly falling short in his own eyes.
Compare that to Pete Best, the original Beatles drummer, fired literally right before they hit the stratosphere.
Yeah, he went through a really dark time, depression, even attempted suicide. But later in life, interviews show him saying he was ultimately happier than he thinks he would have been with the Beatles. His values shifted.
He prioritized family, a stable life, things he might not have had with Beatlemania. He started measuring his life differently, using different values and metrics, and by those standards, he considered himself successful and content.
These stories really drive home the point. Some values, and the metrics we use to measure them, are just fundamentally better than others. They lead to healthier problems, problems that are actually solvable and contribute to a good life, rather than trapping us in cycles of frustration.
So, what are the shitty values, according to Manson? The ones that inevitably create bad, unsolvable problems.
He lists a few key ones. First, pleasure. Seeking pleasure above all else. He argues it's in effect a byproduct of happiness, not the cause. Prioritizing life around chasing pleasure often leads to addiction, shallow relationships, neglecting responsibilities.
Okay, what else?
Material success, again, is a primary driver. Research shows that after basic needs are met, more money or stuff has a surprisingly low correlation with long-term happiness. And prioritizing it can lead you to compromise more important values, like honesty or compassion. Using status symbols as your metric is inherently shallow.
Makes sense.
Third, always being right. The need to constantly win arguments, to never admit fault. Our brains are flawed, biased things. Clinging to being right prevents learning, blocks empathy, stops you from considering new information. It's usually better to assume you're probably wrong about a lot of things.
Humility, basically.
Yeah. And finally, staying positive at all costs. This is a big one he critiques. He sees it as a form of denial. Basically, repressing negative emotions, which are crucial signals. It's avoiding problems rather than facing them. Sometimes life just sucks, and the healthiest, most sane thing you can do is admit it.
So those negative emotions, anger, sadness, fear, guilt, they aren't just okay. They're actually a necessary part of emotional health. You need to feel them sometimes to know when something's wrong, when your values are being violated, when action is needed.
Exactly. Denying necessary pain, denying problems, just leads to a shallow, meaningless existence. Think about the hardest things people do: training for a marathon, raising a kid, starting a business from scratch.
Yeah, they're incredibly stressful, packed with problems, often unpleasant in the moment.
But they're also often the most meaningful, deeply rewarding, and ultimately joyful experiences in life. He quotes Freud, saying something like, looking back, "The years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful."
So those shitty values, chasing pleasure, material success, being right, forced positivity, they're poor ideals to build a life around. The greatest moments often aren't inherently pleasant or successful or universally known or positive while they're happening. Those things are side effects of living by better, deeper values.
And how do you tell good values from bad ones? Manson offers some criteria. Good values tend to be reality-based, socially constructive, and immediate and controllable. Things like honesty, vulnerability, self-respect, curiosity, creativity, humility, charity.
Things you can enact right now, yourself.
Bad values tend to be superstitious, socially destructive, or not immediate and controllable. Things like striving for dominance over others through manipulation, indiscriminate sex as a goal, just wanting to feel good all the time, craving attention, needing to be liked by everyone, being rich just for the sake of being rich.
Things that depend heavily on external validation or circumstances.
Right. Good values are achieved internally. Bad values rely on external factors. Values are fundamentally about your priorities. Onoda's value loyalty to a dead empire created decades of terrible, ultimately pointless problems for him. Mustaine's metric, being bigger than Metallica, gave him awful problems, despite enormous objective success. Pete Best changed his values, his metrics, and found happiness.
So self-improvement, in Manson's view, isn't about acquiring more positive feelings. It's fundamentally about prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give a fuck about.
Better fucks lead to better problems. Better problems lead to a better life. It's an ongoing process.
And a huge part of choosing those better problems and solving them involves taking responsibility for everything, regardless of whose fault it actually is.
This distinction between responsibility and fault is so critical, and something people really struggle with. He argues that a lot of our misery comes from feeling like our problems are outside our control, that we're just victims of circumstance.
But choosing your problems, and more importantly, choosing to take responsibility for how you handle them, even if you didn't cause them, that's incredibly empowering.
He tells the story of William James, who's basically the father of American psychology. As a young man, James was a mess. Chronically ill, failed artist, failed student, deeply depressed, even suicidal,
Hit rock bottom.
completely. And he decided to try an experiment. For 1 full year, he would choose to believe he was 100% responsible for everything that happened in his life, regardless of the external cause. And he would act accordingly, actively working to change his circumstances based on that premise.
And that period, that conscious choice to take total responsibility, became this kind of rebirth for him. It launched his incredibly influential life and career.
Because we're always making choices, whether we realize it or not. How we interpret events, what we decide to value, the metrics we use to judge success or failure. Those are choices. There's no such thing as not giving a single fuck. Choosing not to care about something is still a choice, still an action you're responsible for.
It's the Spider-Man principle, basically. With great power, the power to choose your perspective and your response, comes great responsibility.
But people resist taking responsibility, often because they confuse it with fault. If something bad happens, our immediate instinct is often, it's not my fault. And we think that absolves us of any further action or ownership of the situation.
Right, like fault is the end of the story.
But fault is about the past. Who caused it? Responsibility is about the present and the future. What are you going to do about it now? Manson uses the analogy of a baby left on your doorstep. It's absolutely not your fault the baby is there.
Definitely not.
But you are now 100% responsible for deciding what to do next. Call the police, take it in, ignore it. You are responsible for your choices, your reactions, how you value the situation, even though you didn't cause it.
And Manson is really blunt here. Nobody else is ever responsible for your unhappiness but you. Other people might do things that trigger feelings, circumstances might be difficult.
But your feelings themselves, your reactions, how you choose to see things, how you choose to value things in any given situation, ultimately, that choice, that responsibility rests with you.
He shares that really painful personal example of an ex-girlfriend cheating on him.
Right. Her cheating.
Yeah.
Clearly her fault. But his resulting misery of the months of resentment, anger, feeling helpless and wronged, that feeling, he realized, was his responsibility to manage.
Focusing on her fault didn't actually help him feel better or move on.
No. What helped was taking responsibility for improving his own life. Exercising, reconnecting with friends, traveling, volunteering, choosing better values like self-care and self-worth over stewing in resentment.
And later, he even took responsibility for acknowledging his own part in the relationship's breakdown before the cheating, being cold, maybe arrogant, taking her for granted.
Not to excuse her actions at all, but to own his side of it so he could learn and grow for the future. He says he learned far more from taking responsibility for that painful problem than from any of his successes.
Because taking responsibility for our problems, even the parts we didn't directly cause, is where all the real learning and growth happens. Blaming others, blaming circumstances. It's just an excuse that keeps you stuck.
And this applies even to genuine tragedy, genuine victimhood. If you're mugged on the street, it is absolutely not your fault.
Not in any way.
But you are responsible for how you react afterwards. Do you let it traumatize you into never leaving the house? Do you seek help? Do you work through the fear? Those choices, that responsibility for managing the fallout, is yours. He uses Malala Yousafzai as an example.
Shot by the Taliban for advocating for girls' education. Clearly not her fault.
Absolutely not. But she was responsible for her choice and reaction to continue speaking out even more forcefully. Her responsible reaction to victimhood turned her into a global symbol and Nobel laureate.
It contrasts with the story he tells of the man who angrily blamed Manson for the pain he felt after his own son died.
The son's tragic death was obviously not the man's fault. But the father was responsible for how he reacted, the meaning he chose to assign to that horrific event, and what he chose to do with his life moving forward. Pain is inevitable. Meaning is chosen through our response.
This even applies to the genetic hand we're dealt, or a difficult upbringing. You're not at fault for having a genetic predisposition to anxiety or for growing up in an abusive home.
No fault there. But managing that anxiety, working through the trauma from that childhood, that is your responsibility now as an adult.
He uses the poker analogy. You don't choose the cards you're dealt, your genetics, your family, your circumstances.
But the game, life itself, is about the choices you make with those cards. And often, the people who make the best choices with the hand they have end up doing better than people dealt amazing cards who make consistently poor choices.
The book also takes a shot at what he calls victimhood chic. This trend may be amplified by the internet and social media, where people seem to compete in passing responsibility by blaming others or claiming offense, often for attention or sympathy.
Right, where feeling offended becomes almost a badge of honor, a way to feel morally superior, a kind of emotional high.
He argues this is problematic because it sucks attention away from people who are actually victims of severe injustice, like the boy who cried wolf. And it erodes our collective ability to navigate disagreement respectfully.
A free society requires being able to deal with views you find offensive or just plain wrong. That's part of the deal. He advocates picking your battles wisely, trying to cultivate empathy even for those you disagree with, being skeptical of media outrage narratives, and prioritizing honesty and doubt over the need to feel right or get revenge.
Okay, so choosing better values, taking responsibility. Conceptually simple, maybe, but incredibly hard in practice. It involves embracing some really uncomfortable stuff like acknowledging you might be wrong about pretty much everything.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow. But he argues that changing the things you give a fuck about, taking responsibility, it inevitably brings uncomfortable side effects. Like uncertainty, am I doing the right thing now? Or feeling like a failure because you're no longer meeting your old, possibly shitty metrics.
Or even rejection relationships that were built around your old values might crumble when you change.
These uncomfortable feelings, he says, are actually normal signs of growth. Our old beliefs, even the ones that are demonstrably false, provide a sense of comfort, stability. Letting them go feels disorienting, scary.
Plus, our memories are faulty. Our brains are biased. We're constantly rewriting the past to make sense of our present feelings and beliefs.
He shares that striking story of Meredith Moran, the writer who, through therapy, developed a completely false memory of childhood sexual abuse.
Based on existing family tensions, relationship problems, immersion in certain theories, and suggestive therapy, her mind essentially invented a traumatic memory to create a coherent narrative for her present suffering. False memory syndrome.
It's a chilling example of how powerful our brain's need for meaning is, and how easily it can construct narratives that aren't true.
So the lesson isn't just trust yourself or follow your gut. It's more like constantly question yourself. Question your intentions, your motivations, your beliefs.
If we accept the premise that everyone is wrong about something, probably many things, then self-skepticism, actively challenging our own most cherished beliefs, is the only reliable path to genuine progress. It's terrifying, but also incredibly liberating.
Because the alternative, pure certainty, is dangerous. He tells the story of Erin, a woman deep into self-help who became delusional, convinced she was destined to be with Manson, justifying stalking and harassment.
Her certainty, rooted in flawed values and interpretations, refused all evidence to the contrary. It justified harmful behavior because she knew she was right.
He cites research showing that often the perpetrators of great evil aren't necessarily lowlifes, but people with high self-esteem and absolute certainty in their own righteousness. That certainty justifies hurting others because they are deemed evil or wrong. Think of the Milgram experiments, people inflicting pain because an authority figure gave them the certainty they were doing the right thing.
Insecurity can breed entitlement. And the backwards law applies here too. The harder you strive for certainty, the more uncertain and anxious you feel. But if you can embrace uncertainty, accept that you don't know everything, you actually become more comfortable, more secure in navigating the world despite not knowing.
Uncertainty is the root of all progress, isn't it? You can't learn anything new without first admitting you don't know it. It removes judgment of others and yourself. We don't become right, we just become incrementally less wrong over time by being willing to revise our beliefs.
Avoiding this growth, clinging to certainty, often stems from a fear of changing our identity. The person who knows they're a practical adjuster avoids writing the screenplay because failure would challenge that identity. The person who knows they're a nice guy avoids ending a toxic friendship.
It feels easier, safer, to stay in the painful certainty of who you think you are, rather than test those beliefs and risk discovering something new or uncomfortable. Clinging to comfortable beliefs mortgages your future happiness. Certainty is the enemy of growth.
So accept the inevitable imperfections of your values and beliefs. Actively seek out doubt. Look for ways you might be wrong. That vulnerability is where change happens.
And we can't even fully trust our immediate gut reaction about whether an experience is truly positive or negative in the long run. Sometimes the most difficult moments are the most formative. Sometimes easy success makes us complacent. Future generations will probably look back at our current certainties and laugh. Hopefully, they'll be less wrong.
He mentions that psychology experiment, where people given random feedback still invent elaborate, unique rituals to explain it. Our brains are meaning-making machines, desperate to find patterns even where none exist. We get attached to the meaning we create, even if it's based on flawed premises. Most of our beliefs are probably wrong. Some are just less wrong than others.
Which leads to his counterintuitive advice. Don't find yourself. Never know who you are. Keep striving, keep discovering, stay humble. It makes you more accepting of differences in others, too.
And the metaphorical idea to kill yourself, meaning let go of that rigid, arbitrary mental construction of you. Let go of the fixed metrics, the feeling that your problems are uniquely special. Self-absorption is rooted in that certainty. I am special. My problems are unique.
A narrow, rigid identity feels constantly threatened by anything that challenges it. Defining yourself more simply, more ordinarily, based on chosen actions and values rather than fixed traits. It's liberating. Give up the grandiose ideas, the entitlement, the constant chase for emotional highs. There might be a withdrawal period, he warns, but it's worth it.
This all ties into the next major theme: freedom through commitment. Manson talks about his own past as a digital nomad, 55 countries over 5+ years. Sounds like the ultimate freedom, right?
Yeah, total adventure.
But he realized it was also fueled by commitment issues, maybe some underlying shame, constantly bouncing between surface-level highs, never really putting down roots.
He came to believe that absolute freedom, the ability to do anything, go anywhere, be anyone, paradoxically means nothing. Real meaning, real importance comes from rejecting alternatives, from narrowing your freedom by choosing to commit to a place, to a person, to a craft, to a set of values.
His travels weren't wasted, though. They exposed him to different value systems. He contrasts the blunt, direct honesty he found valued in Russia, where trust was built on saying what you mean, even if it's harsh, with what he perceived as the sometimes performative fake niceness in the West, which seemed to prioritize appearance and salesmanship over truth.
And he found an unexpected kind of freedom in that directness, that acceptance of rejection as just part of communication, the ability to say what you think without constantly worrying about offending someone.
Because rejection, he argues, isn't something to be avoided at all costs. It's actually essential for a meaningful life. You have to reject some things, some paths, some people, some values, in order to truly stand for something else. To have an identity, to have values, means choosing. To value X requires you to reject non-X.
Avoiding rejection at all costs, always trying to please everyone, never saying no, never taking a stand, leads to prioritizing short-term pleasure and validation over long-term meaning and integrity. It creates a rudderless existence. Entitlement feeds into this too, the belief that you deserve to feel great all the time and avoid any discomfort, including rejection.
So being comfortable with saying no and hearing no is a crucial life skill. It's fundamental for honesty. It's what allows for healthy relationships and emotional lives.
Which leads directly into his discussion of boundaries in relationships.
Yeah, clearly defining where your responsibility for your own problems and values ends and where your partner's begins. Healthy relationships involve each person taking responsibility for their own shit and supporting their partner in taking responsibility for theirs.
Toxic relationships often involve avoiding your own issues by either blaming your partner for them or by trying to take responsibility for your partner's issues.
Examples of poor boundaries. Things like jealous demands, you can't talk to them. Blaming your partner for your feelings, he made me angry. Expecting them to fix your bad mood, or demanding they take responsibility for solving your life problems.
He calls these entitled traps in relationships. Either you expect your partner to be responsible for your happiness and solve your problems, making you the victim,
or you take on too much responsibility for your partner's happiness and problems, making you the saver-fixer. Both roles, he argues, are ways of avoiding your own pain and responsibilities, and they make the relationship fragile, conditional, and ultimately fake. He notes how often our adult relationship dynamics mirror the unhealthy patterns we might have learned with our parents.
When responsibility is murky, shared values become weak. If your primary value in a relationship is just making my partner happy or getting my partner to make me happy, it's inherently unstable and self-defeating.
This often plays out as the victim-saver dynamic. People in these roles are often drawn to each other because their pathologies fit together perfectly. They use each other for emotional highs. The victim gets attention and validation by creating problems. The saver gets validation by fixing them.
But the underlying intentions are selfish and conditional. They're not actually meeting each other's real needs for authentic connection and growth.
Manson offers a kind of litmus test. How would refusing a request or expectation change the relationship? If saying no results in massive drama, guilt-tripping, or threats, explicit or implicit, the dynamic is likely conditional and unhealthy.
Strong boundaries, in contrast, mean you're not afraid of conflict or disagreement. You accept you can't control your partner's feelings, only your own actions. You support their individual growth and problem solving rather than trying to do it for them or demanding they do it for you. That's closer to unconditional love, supporting the person and their journey, even when it's difficult.
And trust, paradoxically, requires conflict to be truly tested and built. Conflict reveals who is genuinely there for you, unconditionally, versus who is only there when things are easy or when their conditions are met. Without the ability to safely say and hear no, relationships become based on manipulation, people-pleasing, and misrepresentation, not real trust.
He uses the really tough example of rebuilding trust after infidelity.
Yeah. For trust to have any chance, the cheater can't just apologize. They have to take responsibility for the true, shitty underlying values that led to the betrayal. Yes, gee, I valued my immediate gratification over our commitment. I was selfish and didn't respect you. They have to own that and then demonstrate consistently, over time, through actions, that they're living by new, better values.
It's a long, uncomfortable process. And if trust is broken repeatedly, he suggests, it's often impossible to rebuild because it signals the underlying values likely haven't fundamentally changed.
This whole idea of commitment relates back to the paradox of choice in our modern world. Consumer culture screams, more options, keep your options open.
But research shows having too many options often leads to less satisfaction, more anxiety, and paralysis. We avoid committing because we fear missing out on something better.
Manson distinguishes between pursuing breadth versus depth. Breadth, experiencing lots of different things, places, people, is valuable, especially when you're young and figuring things out.
But the deepest rewards in life, the real gold, he argues, come from depth. From committing to something and sticking with it, decades invested in a relationship, mastering a craft, building a career, contributing to a community. Endlessly chasing breadth offers diminishing returns after a certain point.
He talks about his own life shift, settling in New York City, getting married, focusing exclusively on his writing, cultivating deep, committed friendships. It involved consciously rejecting other possibilities, other paths he could have taken.
And finding, counterintuitively, more freedom and liberation in that commitment. Because it honed his focus, eliminated the constant noise of FOMO, fear of missing out, allowed him to direct his energy towards what truly mattered to him, and ultimately achieve greater success and fulfillment within those chosen commitments.
Breadth helps you discover what might be worth committing to. Depth allows you to reap the profound rewards of that commitment.
And finally, the ultimate perspective shift, the lens that reframes everything else, and then you die.
Yeah, it's heavy but crucial. He begins this section with the story of his friend Josh, who tragically died in a cliff-jumping accident shortly after drunkenly telling Manson, "Seek the truth for yourself and I will meet you there."
He describes Josh's death in stark, unflinching detail, the probable cause being dehydration leading to cramps, being a poor swimmer, the dark water, his screams likely unheard. It's brutal. And he says it was the single most transformative moment in his entire life.
He fell into a deep depression, feeling completely numb, haunted by dreams of Josh. But emerging from that absolute abyss came this stark, unavoidable realization rooted in the finality of death. If death is guaranteed for all of us, then there is absolutely no rational reason to be afraid of anything else.
Fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, fear of rejection, shame. These things become utterly insignificant when weighed against the certainty of mortality. Avoiding pain, avoiding risk wasn't really living. It was just avoiding being alive while waiting to die.
That realization became the catalyst for his personal transformation. He quit bad habits, threw himself into education, building a career, forming real relationships, working incredibly hard. He still had insecurities, sure, but now he was giving a fuck about something infinitely more important than those fears. Josh's death, in a way, gave him permission to truly live. Excruciatingly painful, but life-changing.
He connects this personal experience to the work of Ernest Becker, particularly his book, The Denial of Death.
Right. Becker argued that much of human civilization, our striving, our values, our achievements, are essentially immortality projects. Ways we try to deny our physical death by creating things, ideas, legacies, families, art, nations that allow our conceptual selves to feel like they live on after our bodies are gone. Wars and conflicts often erupt when these fundamental immortality projects clash.
And when our values, our chosen immortality projects, fail us or prove meaningless, that underlying terror of death resurfaces. Our values, Manson suggests, act as barometers of meaning, helping us navigate and distract ourselves from existential dread. Giving a fuck about something meaningful buffers us.
not giving a fuck about the trivial, embracing impermanence, accepting death. He sees this as almost a quasi-spiritual practice. It reduces entitlement because you recognize your limited time and the smallness of your ego concerns in the grand scheme.
Death is the only absolute certainty, and therefore it should be the ultimate compass guiding our values and decisions. What truly matters in the face of oblivion.
The only way to become comfortable with death, he argues, is to see yourself as part of something larger than your individual ego. To choose values that extend beyond just serving yourself, values that are simple, immediate, controllable, tolerant, reality-based. This, he suggests, is the bedrock of deep, lasting happiness.
Entitlement, on the other hand, is described as a spiritual poison. It isolates you. He observes materially well-off societies potentially creating psychologically tormented individuals obsessed with superficial issues, demanding the world cater to their feelings, clinging violently to their certainties, paralyzed by fear of failure, mistaking online attention for real success.
Manson's closing argument isn't about striving to become extraordinary. It's the radical idea that you are already great, not because of your achievements or specialness, but simply because you exist and have the capacity to choose what to give a fuck about consciously in the face of endless confusion and certain death. That choice is the greatness.
He quotes Bukowski again near the end, something like, "We are terrorized and flattened by life's trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing. We let the small stuff consume us because we haven't chosen something bigger, something meaningful, to anchor ourselves to in the face of mortality."
Josh's death served as that anchor for Manson. It stripped away the fear of the trivial, revealing there's truly nothing to be afraid of compared to the ultimate end. He talks about actively reminding himself of death through reflection, reading philosophy, even doing slightly crazy things like standing near a cliff edge as a way to keep things in perspective.
Yeah, he recounts that intense experience standing on a cliff at the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, fighting his primal survival instincts, feeling overwhelming terror mixed with a strange euphoria.
Sitting right on the edge, dangling his legs over, consciously reminding himself it's okay to die. It sounds extreme, but for him, it was a visceral way to confront reality, embrace impermanence, like the Stoics or Buddhists advocated.
An Australian tourist apparently saw him and asked, concerned, if he was all right. Manson's reply, feeling that raw mix of fear and life force. Alive, very alive.
Wow, yeah, that really lands the point.
What a journey. That was a genuine deep dive into some incredibly challenging and definitely unconventional ideas from Mark Manson's book.
For sure. We've really unpacked that core paradox of don't try, how chasing constant positive feelings is often a trap, and just how crucial it is to consciously choose what few things truly deserve our limited fucks.
Yeah, and we looked at how entitlement, fueled maybe by media and avoiding discomfort, keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
And the surprising liberation that can come from accepting, okay, maybe I'm not special, maybe I'm wrong about a lot, and realizing happiness isn't found despite problems, but actually in solving the ones we choose to care about.
We explored that key distinction between responsibility and fault, so important, how embracing uncertainty is actually what fuels growth, and the unexpected strength and authenticity that comes from setting real boundaries, saying no, and building healthier, committed relationships.
And finally, yeah, confronting the big one, mortality. The idea that facing our own death isn't morbid, but can be the most powerful clarifying force, helping us prioritize values that extend beyond ourselves and find profound meaning even in the midst of inevitable struggle and suffering.
It is definitely a lot to absorb.
Yeah.
And it really asks you, the listener, to question some deeply ingrained beliefs about what a good life is supposed to look like.
So maybe here's a provocative thought to leave you with, building on everything we've discussed about choosing your struggles and deciding what really matters. Think about your life right now. What is one difficult or uncomfortable problem you're facing, maybe one you've been avoiding or blaming others for? What would it look like to choose to fully embrace that problem, take 100% responsibility for how you engage with it, simply because, for whatever reason, it's your problem to solve right now?
Just sit with that particular struggle for a moment.
And we'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.